There is no pill to fix this. Yet, we believe that the best RX for all of this is our collective action. That is why Earth Gives was established. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third Power Hour for Earth Gives 2025. I am Rhonda Bannard. I am the founder and executive director of Earth Gives. We established a nationwide campaign to boost giving, engagement, learning, and leading with environmental nonprofits all across the country, because these organizations are on the front lines actually doing the work and driving solutions. Yet, we found that only 2% of all philanthropy goes to environmental nonprofits, and only 0.5% when it comes to environmental justice. This week is New York Week, and all of them are talking about climate finance. Well, we're talking about climate finance through philanthropy and through the organizations that are doing extremely local work or even global systems change work. And they're all featured at earthgives.org through October 7th. And we want to invite your generosity and support, and know that even sharing the various organizations out there doing this will have an impact, because we want to invite the others. It is so wonderful to see you all for our third of 4 Power Hours. The program will include 2 presentations, then we'll open it up for questions and answers. I'll do a short wrap at the end at about 50 to 55 minutes in. And then we hope that you stay for the breakout groups, because it's really important now more than ever for us to connect, to meet others, to collaborate, to share what we've learned, and share what we're going to do to make an impact. To get us started, I have the good fortune to introduce you to Paloma Greenwald. She and I met at Environment Day at the state legislature, so I knew that we were set to be good friends. Paloma is a registered nurse with more than 25 years of experience as a public health professional, specializing in Spanish-speaking populations and health policy advocacy. Since I met her, she joined Elders Climate Action, one of our participants for Earth Gives 2025. In that position with Elders Climate Action, she mobilizes a nation of elders to eliminate the burning of fossil fuels through public policy and advocacy. This powerhouse is here to introduce our 2 organizations who are presenting today. Paloma, take it away.
Yeah, hi everybody. And Rhonda, thank you so much for this invitation. Obviously, I feel very strongly connected to you and our joint mission. But this particular topic today is actually very personal to me. I have a history of breast cancer in my family. I'm a Latina. I was born and raised on the border of Mexico. And, there's a stereotype. We're kind of thrifty. We save all our Tupperware is reused from butter and like yogurt containers. And I'm actually really concerned and interested to hear how that might affect our health when we're applying single-use plastics in basically our food chain. And so I'm super excited for this. Having worked now with Elders Climate Action, I will absolutely absorb all this information and pass it on. So it's my pleasure, really. I'm honored to introduce these 2 also powerhouse women leading the way in health and in science. You will first hear from Joy Reeves, the Director of Policy and Strategic Development at the Rachel Carson Council. The council is a DC-based environmental justice nonprofit, which is focused on science-driven science-driven storytelling, which we need more science in this country at the moment. Reliable science for sure. And so her advocacy against toxins and pesticides, industry greenwashing, and so much more will really be a value add. I'm sure Joy will also share more about the namesake of her organization. And I'm sure that the late Rachel Carson is thrilled that the group is now working with more than 85 universities to bring that youth voices to DC and elsewhere. Joy has a master's in environmental management from Duke University, and her storytelling advocacy has taken her all the way to COP28 in Dubai and to the Galapagos with National Geographic's Lindblad. We can go on, and yet since Earth Gives was founded in Arizona, we have to make note that Joy is named a Udall Scholar in 2021. These people are named after the brothers Mo and Stuart, both of whom represented the state in Congress, and Mo serving as Secretary of the Interior. So after Joy's talk, we're going to hear from Dr. Libby Davis. She's a science manager for the Center for Environmental Health. Libby evaluates and develops scientific approaches to reduce the public's exposure to toxic chemicals from food, water, air, and consumer products. She does this through litigation, compliance testing, policy, and community engagement strategies. And prior to joining the center, she also worked as a faculty member at Butler University, where she taught environmental chemistry coursework and mentored undergraduates in research. She has a PhD in environmental chemistry and toxicology from Duke University and a BA in chemistry from St. Mary's College of Maryland. When not seeking out or geeking out on science, she spends time horseback riding and reading in her base of Indianapolis, Indiana. So please, let's get started learning. After all, our health is on the line. Joy, all set?
Yes, thank you so much, Paloma. And thank you all for being here. I see colleagues, I see friends, I see partner organizations. And what I know about today's call is that the expertise is going to come from all of you as much as it's going to come from Libby and myself. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and just know that I'm really delighted on behalf of the RCC to be here with all of you. So just holler if anyone has trouble seeing this, but I'll go ahead and kick off the presentation, which I've nicknamed today's Silent Spring, because I bet a lot of you are familiar with Rachel Carson's namesake book, Silent Spring, on pesticide reform all the way back in the 1960s. So obligatory Rachel Carson quote to kick us off. Why should we tolerate a diet of weak poisons, a home in insipid surroundings, a circle of acquaintances who are not quite our enemies, the noise of motors with just enough relief to prevent insanity? Who would want to live in a world which is just not quite fatal? I think Rachel Carson's words ring true today still. We live in a world that is not quite fatal because of the toxic chemicals and synthetics that come out of the industries that we've relied on for decades. And you can even see here in this chart that since the publication of Silent Spring in the 1960s, pesticide use in the US agriculture sector has not declined. It has taken off in many capacities. If we look at insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, and other pesticides, around 98% of all US farms use conventional practices of spraying fertilizers and pesticides that are synthetic. And that's where we try to come in at the Rachel Carson Council on these issues to protect people, protect their families and their health from the health risks that come with synthetic pesticides. You know, brain, prostate, kidney, and liver cancers, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, leukemia, birth defects, endocrine disruption, and the list goes on. And just very quickly, some additional context. You can see here the USA compared to the European Union, Brazil, and China has not banned many of the pesticides that other countries have banned or are in the process of banning. In fact, the US still uses over 70 pesticides that are banned in the European Union. So at the Rachel Carson Council, we are focused on pesticide reform in addition to climate justice and shutting down false greenwashed industries, including the wood pellet industry. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is known for our environmental justice advocacy campaigns, which I've listed out here, including our Coasts and Oceans program and our ecology and bird program in the legacy of Rachel Carson. We're also known for our commitment to student advocacy through our campus network of over 85 colleges and universities, because as we were discussing earlier, right, these issues are exponentially more powerful when there are youth sitting in the room emphasizing their concern for the issues that were around in the 1960s. This fight is ongoing and intergenerational. So finally, being the legacy org of Rachel Carson Council, we're really happy to be here today. And quickly, before diving in, our approach at RCC is kind of 3 pillars. One is science-driven storytelling. So we train fellows to advocate, to show up in the rooms where it matters, to garner publication status in major outlets like the Washington Post, The Hill, the Wall Street Journal, and others, and to use creativity in storytelling when it comes to things like pesticide reform and toxics. We had one fellow recently do a side-by-side picture of her father's jeans as an agricultural worker and what they look like at the end of the day after lots of exposures to toxic pesticides and other risks. Our second pillar is the civic and campus engagement. How can we bring in this US-wide network of colleges and universities to raise voices around toxics and pesticide reform? We host 2 fellowships, one in partnership with Duke University and then one nationally through the college semester system. And then finally, advocacy on Capitol Hill and in state and local legislatures. So, what do we mean by toxics? The RCC focuses on chemical toxicity, so toxic chemicals that come usually pesticides, plastics and petrochemicals, and then other pollutants and everyday toxics. And I'm sure Libby's presentation will go into a lot more scientific detail than this short overview will, but we're focusing on the pesticides that are found in produce residues, that are found in pest control products and lawn care products affecting agricultural workers as well as an environmental justice concern. There are about 1 billion pounds of pesticides used per year in the USA, if you can believe that, and about half of tested food shows residues. As for plastics and petrochemicals, which will also show up today in our presentations, we're talking about the 99% of plastics that actually come from petrochemicals. So a direct link to the fossil fuel industry. And I'm sure many of you heard that there was a recent failure around the Global Plastics Treaty. The US had a role in that, certainly. And time is running out to really curb plastic pollution before production expands by 2060, which we're on the course for right now, according to industry. As for pollutants and everyday toxics, PFAS is one of our major concerns. And because the federal regulatory landscape around PFAS is kind of a roller coaster, you know, whether the PFAS standards are going to be upheld from the Biden administration, or 2 of the PFAS-related chemicals are not going to be upheld in terms of their limits, it's really going to be up to states to produce regulations on PFAS. And I actually invite Senator Sarah Love, if your staff is on this call, and I know there are a bunch of Marylanders on this call, please drop information about the upcoming Maryland bill as an example of how states can really take action to regulate PFAS. And then finally, heavy metals, VOCs, and dioxins kind of also stem from heavy industry and can show up in everything from indoor pollutants and fragrances to waste incineration. Some sources of exposure in your home. I've listed out very broadly kind of the cosmetics, the food and water, and the everyday products where you can find a lot of toxics that are harmful to human health. And broadly speaking, the 3 categories of human health in concern are carcinogens, neurotoxins, and endocrine disruptors. So essentially, products that can cause cancer, can cause neurological and developmental health risks, and then products that are endocrine or hormone disruptors. I'm not going to run through each of these in great detail, but you will see on this slide, the RCC has come up with a broad list of steps you can take to protect yourself and your family. And just note that this list is designed for folks who don't have unlimited money, unlimited time, unlimited resources, but just want to keep your family safe. So at the grocery store, we recommend buying organic when you can. And if you have to pick and choose between produce, we recommend looking at the EWG's Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen list. The Dirty Dozen is, if you're going to splurge and spend money on organic food, pick from those 15 foods. It includes, spinach, strawberries, kale, leafy greens, all the worst and most toxic produce residues. And then certain other things, like bananas, mangoes, maybe they have a thicker skin. Maybe you don't have to buy organic if you're tight on money. That's what we recommend. Just be pragmatic about it. Say no to bags and receipts just to limit plastic exposure, and especially BPA has been found in receipts, even though it's getting phased out in some sources of plastic. Opt for fragrance-free products, and in line with that, simplify your personal beauty routine. That's where a lot of exposure can be reduced, is simply by, if you don't absolutely need to use a product, look at the chemical components of it and decide, has this been marketed on me? Am I tempted to use a product that I don't really need to be using? And what I've done, I've made a mental list of things to just always buy PFAS-free, for instance, which is mascara and waterproofs, dental floss, cookware, just kind of the big bad guys. And then finally, at home, make sure to wash and dry produce and use a paper towel for skin residue, although sometimes the residues are actually in the fruit or produce itself. But if you can't do anything else, definitely have a washing routine. Use glass or stainless steel for storage. Avoid heating up plastic, especially softer plastic. And when you clean, treat it like a big ordeal. Ventilate, gear up, protect yourself if you absolutely can't buy products that are free of toxic chemicals. And then finally, filter drinking water, whether that's a Brita water filter or you want to invest in a reverse osmosis filter to get out very granular substances, including PFAS. That's something we recommend as a practical precaution. I will end and pass it off to the longer CEH presentation with this. The number one thing that you can do as an individual is to join a collective. So all of those individual tips can be useful in reducing your exposures, but in terms of individual action, you should find an amazing pesticide reform group or anti-toxics group in your community to join forces with, show up in local venues, and make your voice heard. That's the best thing you can do. And with that, my final call to action, what we're focused on in terms of policy right now at RCC is to stop pesticide preemption. What's happening federally right now as appropriations bills are in discussion is essentially there's an attempt to curb states and localities' ability to regulate against pesticides beyond the federal baseline. The federal baseline is a law called FIFRA, where pesticides have to get registered and labeled in order to be used. But the problem is, if states and localities can't enact stricter regulations than that label, it can lead to a lot of health concerns for farm workers, for the schools and parks that need children protected with things like buffer zones and individualized protections. And we can't risk seeing this language, which has been called poison pill language, enabling the pesticide industry to get away with this. So I'm happy to provide more follow-up information after this call. If you want to get involved on stopping pesticide preemption, this is kind of the overarching big issue that will determine our toxic exposures for decades to come. And it's an industry pattern too. We've seen some of this with plastics at state legislature levels too, where states and localities can't regulate strictly against plastics. And it's really dangerous. So as the Farm Bill comes up and as appropriations are being discussed, we encourage you to stay in touch with RCC and get on our email list to raise your voice on pesticide preemption. I'll end with this final Rachel Carson quote: "If the Bill of Rights contains no guarantee that a citizen shall be secure against lethal poisons distributed either by private individuals or by public officials, it is surely only because our forefathers, despite their considerable wisdom and foresight, could conceive of no such problem." And that's why we encourage you to join us. Thank you all so much. And I will hand it off to Libby for a more in-depth presentation on the science of toxics. Thank you all for being here and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Joy. That was fantastic. I loved learning more about the Rachel Carson Council. And I want to say thank you to everybody on this call for being here, taking the time out of your day and joining us. I'm really glad to be here representing the Center for Environmental Health, and even gladder that I get a chance to talk with you after this presentation and learn from one another. That's really, I think, the best way to collaborate and make a difference. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So as I said, I'm here representing the Center for Environmental Health, CEH. And Center for Environmental Health was started almost 30 years ago. It's known, we are sort of best known for our work enforcing California's state law, which goes by the name Proposition 65. Proposition 65 is a right to know law that essentially requires companies to label their products if their products contain a chemical at such a level that would expose the average user to a level of that chemical that would cause either cancer or reproductive harm. There's a list maintained of these toxic chemicals, and if they are found in these products at a level sufficient to cause harm, the product must at minimum bear a label. And a lot of the time, products don't actually have labels for a number of reasons. So one of the things that we do is we enforce that law so that citizens have full information and buying power when they are making their choices at the store. More than that, though, one of our central commitments is to encourage reformulation of products so that the warnings aren't even necessary. Often we can work with a class of defendants or a broader group to try to come to some agreement that would remove the chemical from remove the exposure from the product entirely. So that's one of the things that the Center for Environmental Health is really well known for. We also work on the front end of product design and purchasing. We work with manufacturers and large-scale purchasers in government sectors, academia, and corporate partners as well to encourage more sustainable purchasing practices. So there's sort of this moving the needle on the back end towards systemic change, towards safer, more sustainable options that are backed by the best available science, and then the enforcement end at the other end. We also work with fence line communities that are impacted by pollution. We do a lot of community advocacy work and a lot of policy advocacy work, both in the California State House and nationwide. One of the things that I want to point out about Proposition 65 is it is a California state law, and CEH is a California organization in its origins. There was a study recently that when a chemical was listed on Proposition 65 and the chemical was now subject to warnings or reformulations, levels of that chemical in the bodies of Californians and Americans nationwide started to decline. And that I think really speaks to the fact that as California goes, so goes the nation, right? The old adage, which is kind of an electoral comment, maybe less realistic these days. But because California is such a large market, if we can influence the market in California, we can influence the health of Americans across the country. And I think that's a really powerful mandate for CEH. So what I want to talk to you about today are just what are toxics from a very scientific basic standpoint, and what are some of the effects that we're concerned about. And then I'm just going to jump right into avoiding some hidden everyday toxics. What are some toxics, particularly those associated with plastic use, because that was one of the themes of this call, that are hidden in plain sight every day? What are some of the things to be aware about? How to cut through the noise of all of the different concerns that we are all told that we should worry about? What are some of the pressing ones? And what are some simple behavioral changes or product swaps that you can make that are just easy, actionable steps on an individual level? And then, as my colleague Joy pointed out at the end of her brilliant talk, I want to emphasize her point that environmental issues are collective. Environmental health is a collective issue, not an individual one. And so I want to end on a bigger picture note to talk about some ways that you can get involved as well, because that's the most powerful way to affect change. And then we'll have time for some Q&A, which I'm really excited about. So this seems like a very simple concept. What are toxics? It's a word that you'll hear sometimes is toxic. Sometimes you'll also hear the word toxins. And I've drawn a distinction here in my presentation. It may seem like a subtle, pedantic difference, but when scientists use toxics versus toxins, we actually mean very different things with those terms. And I think it's worth mentioning and clarifying. So a toxin, according to the scientific definition, is a poison that is produced naturally occurring by an organism. So plants, animals, bacteria, fungi all produce toxins. I have an example here of a poisonous mushroom. Mushrooms produce neurotoxins, well-known source of naturally occurring toxins in the environment. We soak and cook beans to destroy lectins, which are another naturally occurring toxin that cause GI illness. That's one of the reasons that we treat beans the way that we do. Venoms that are injected by bite or sting also count as toxins. Harmful algal blooms that you might come into contact with that can be exacerbated by pollution from fertilizer and things like that run off into waterways. All of these are examples of what a scientist means when we use the word toxin. In terms of dietary exposure, a usual balanced, healthy diet does not expose us to high enough levels of toxins to cause any sort of problems. And it's worth pointing out that our liver is our most important detoxifying organ and really the powerhouse of detoxification in our bodies. So I want to draw the distinction between toxins and toxics or toxicants or toxic chemicals. But that hard C there is the important part to distinguish it from something that I think can get lost in communication sometimes between scientists and the public, when I think the public is perfectly able to see the difference. A toxic or a toxicant is a substance that produces any kind of negative health effect. So we're not ignoring that there are naturally occurring harmful chemicals, but we're widening the scope to focus on synthetic chemicals, chemicals designed and produced by humans for specific purposes, but that unfortunately have some adverse health effect or environmental effect. So thanks to Rachel Carson's brilliant Silent Spring, we're well aware of the issue of pesticides. I have a photo here of some crop dusting going on. Other kinds of toxics that you may have encountered are industrial chemicals, solvents, fuels, benzene, things like that. Heavy metals, of course, are naturally occurring in their origin, but are mined and refined and used in ways that makes them toxic. And then there's a class of chemicals that I would call broadly the better living through chemistry chemicals. Chemicals that are intentional additives to products to try to improve their properties or impart some property that is desirable. So plastic additives, we'll go through a bunch of these. Non-stick and stain-proofing chemicals, chemicals that are intended to slow the spread of a fire. There is an intention behind the addition of these chemicals, and unfortunately, there is also a cost. We encounter these synthetic chemicals in very different contexts than we encounter naturally occurring toxins. And so we need to use different strategies to make sure that toxics are used and disposed of safely, that they are managed appropriately, regulated strictly. And so it's just worthwhile for this little detour to make sure we're using accurate language when we're talking about them as well. So when we're talking about toxic chemicals and their effects, it's important to remember that there can't be a health effect without there first being an exposure. You first have to come in contact with the substance in a way that allows it to enter your body, right? The three main routes of exposure for the average person are dermal, which is through your skin, absorption through your skin, ingestion through your mouth. This also importantly includes hand-to-mouth exposure, which is something that is less important as we age, although still something that, you can touch a surface that has a chemical on it and then put your fingers in your mouth. I used to bite my nails. It's a recurring problem for me. It's a character flaw. But it's especially important for young children who have developmentally appropriate frequent hand-to-mouth behaviors, and therefore, for a lot of reasons, but including this developmental window of behavior, are at higher risk of greater exposure to toxics. And then the third route would be inhalation through your lungs. One other aspect to bear in mind here is that if we're exposed to a chemical faster than our body can get rid of it, either by breaking it down or by excreting it, then that chemical builds up in our body by a process called bioaccumulation. So you can build up a burden of a chemical in your body over time. And again, this is one of the geniuses of Rachel Carson, is the discovery of DDT, not only bioaccumulating in organisms, but as you go up the food chain, the level of DDT increasing to the point that you had a silent spring because all of the songbirds and the top of the food chain predators had experienced massive die-offs. So when our body is exposed to toxic substances, what are some of the effects that can happen? Whichever organ is affected at the lowest dose of that chemical, that's what scientists would call the target organ, or the target system, because often your organs work together as part of a larger group or a larger system. And so here are some of the toxicity types that we're mostly concerned about when we talk about these better living through chemistry hidden toxics. You'll hear a lot about endocrine disruption or endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals that interfere with the natural levels and behaviors of your hormones. So you may have something that mimics estrogen and increases your body's response to estrogen artificially, or something that inhibits it and sort of works in the opposite direction. Then there's testosterone and androgen. There's a lot of different, there's thyroid hormones as well, are part of your endocrine system. Your endocrine system is involved in so many aspects of your health, from growth and development and reproduction and metabolism. So this is really a very sensitive, finely tuned system in your body, and any interference with that can have significant effects. And then there are other organ systems that are responsible for significant specific functions like reproduction, neurological, so your nervous system, behavior, and then your immune system. Many of these chemicals also, like I mentioned, have their most harmful effects during infancy and early childhood development and the prenatal period. Not only because, as I talked about on the exposure slide, children have developmentally appropriate behaviors that predispose them to be exposed to more of a chemical, they also are still undergoing early childhood development when these systems are still being formed, and they're much more vulnerable to changes that are profound and long-lasting. So this is why developmental toxicity is such a concern. And again, this all ties in with endocrine disruption and the very careful timing and cascade of hormone function. And then, of course, there are some chemicals that we have found to have carcinogenic or cancer-causing effects as well. So these are some of the types of toxicity that I want you to keep in mind when we talk about some of the chemicals in this presentation. So what I want to do is go through a few different classes of hidden toxics and talk about where in your daily life you might encounter them, what the concerns are around those chemicals, and then what are some simple individual changes that you can make that are kind of the low-hanging fruit, easy, actionable steps to reduce your exposure. So I want to start with phthalates. The pH is silent. I always think of Daffy Duck when I see this word for phthalates, but the pH is silent. This is a group of chemicals that are used really heavily in a lot of different consumer products. You'll often hear them called plasticizers because of their role in manufacturing certain plastics, especially soft, flexible ones like PVC, polyvinyl chloride, very commonly has phthalates as a component. They're also used in solvents and stabilizers in a lot of consumer products and personal care products, especially those with fragrances, hence the background image here of a bottle of perfume. So you'll encounter phthalates largely in any fragranced personal care product, cosmetic, cleaner, or air freshener. These are all places where phthalates may potentially be found. Toys are another one, especially soft, flexible plastic toys. Any kind of plastic food packaging, again, particularly soft, flexible packaging, is a candidate where phthalates may be present. And then any vinyl PVC products, so tile flooring, anything like that. These are all potential sources of phthalates. With phthalates, largely we're concerned about endocrine disruption. The most vulnerable organ system is the developing male reproductive system. That's where we've seen the most profound effects. So it is a developmental and reproductive set of toxicants. They interfere with the endocrine function in the male reproductive system as it develops, along with many other effects as well. One thing that's really interesting about phthalates and kind of unfortunate is that the FDA rules for labeling products allow you as a manufacturer to list fragrance or flavor as a standalone ingredient and not to require every component of that fragrance or flavor to be listed. These words are common giveaways that a product likely contains phthalates or that there is a chance that it does. So a really easy, simple swap is to read ingredient labels, look for things that say fragrance, parfum, right, or just flavor, and know that it's very likely that there is a phthalate in that product and to eliminate it from your routine. And in general, reducing your use of fragranced cleaning and personal care products can go a long way towards reducing your exposure to phthalates. So again, as Joy made the excellent point, interrogating your routine, figuring out, what products you use, are they truly necessary? Is there an unscented option? Is there an option that spells out what specific chemicals or oils or natural distillates are used to make that fragrance, right? It doesn't have to be entirely unscented. But if it just says fragrance, then that should be a red flag. And that's an easy thing to avoid that everyone can see on a label. I also encourage you to reduce your use of plastic products made from PVC, especially when it comes to products intended for young children, such as toys and teethers. Look for non-plastic options there. And then you'll see these last couple of points on a lot of my slides. These are things that hopefully are actionable and don't require you to change your purchasing habit, but don't heat up plastic with food in it, right? That is one thing that we can all try and do and to avoid that constant stress of the container and the leaching of anything that might be present in it into your food. And this isn't going to be a swap that you can do, but it's a simple behavior change. Because these chemicals are ubiquitous, they're in so many products, and these are simple swaps that we can make, but we will never truly eliminate every single source of these chemicals through individual action. They're in our environment. It is something that is unavoidable. We can limit exposure, we can never truly eliminate it. So great practices for limiting your exposure across the board: washing your hands with soap and water frequently, vacuuming, wet mopping, dusting often. These things can help cut down on the buildup of some of these chemicals in your indoor environment. And again, that inhalation, that hand to mouth exposure from inadvertently touching a surface and then touching your mouth or your food, these are just ways that you can improve the odds of not being exposed to a lot of these chemicals at such high levels. Another category of plasticizer chemicals that you hear about that are often hiding in plain sight are bisphenols. You've probably heard of BPA or bisphenol A, and you've probably also seen a lot of products that are advertised as being BPA free. One of the first places that many people learned about BPA as a concern was in polycarbonate water bottles, for example. Where it gets tricky is that just because a product is labeled BPA free doesn't mean that that plastic or that product suddenly stopped needing whatever advantage the BPA was providing in its manufacture. There is some property that BPA imparted. There is some reason for it to be in the product. So just because it's now BPA free doesn't necessarily mean that it has been completely reformulated to eliminate that need. That is certainly something that CEH advocates for and works for when possible. But a lot of the time, when you see that free of one specific chemical, that just means that manufacturers may have found a chemical that is almost identical and just swapped it in place. We call this regrettable substitution. So that's why you may be hearing more about BPS now than BPA, bisphenol S. It's chemically very, very similar, only a couple of atoms are different, and it has a lot of the same health effects. So there's a long list of other options here. We could continue this conveyor belt of swapping a chemical out and claiming now it's BPS free. But there's bisphenol F, bisphenol B, bisphenol E. There is a long line of potential candidates that can be swapped in this category. So where are we encountering these things for the most part? I mentioned plastic water bottles, plastic food containers, can linings for canned foods, things like that. Those are the places where most people are really familiar with the likelihood of encountering BPA, and also some of these unfortunate substitutes follow-on bisphenols. Another one that is really common in our day-to-day life is thermal receipt paper. And this is often a really large amount of the bisphenol because it's on the surface of the paper as the photo developer, as the thermal developer in the printing process. So there's often a very high concentration of bisphenols on these receipts. And again, bisphenol A is an endocrine disruptor, so we are concerned about developmental and reproductive toxicity when we are exposed to this chemical. Some simple swaps that you can build into your routine are to decline printed receipts whenever possible. We live in a time now where emailed receipts are so much easier in many contexts, not always, but in many contexts. If you don't need the receipt, you can always decline the receipt entirely. If you don't have the option to decline the receipt, just wash your hands. Again, you're going to see that on many of these slides. It's just good public health advice in general, but it's also great advice for limiting your exposure, particularly if you're taking a receipt and then you're about to go eat some food. One thing that I will point out is that using alcohol-based hand sanitizer, which is a great public health measure in a lot of contexts, can actually increase the dermal absorption rate of the bisphenol through your skin. So that's not something that you want to do in conjunction with handling a receipt if you haven't washed your hands first to get that residue off of there. And again, I want to always try to make sure that we're thinking about equity and fairness in this conversation. If you have a career where you are handling receipts as part of your job, this advice isn't something that you can follow because it's part of your day-to-day work. In that case, I would argue that wearing gloves when handling receipts is really important to reduce your exposure. Again, it all kind of comes back to reducing your use of plastic food containers as well, bearing in mind that BPA-free doesn't mean necessarily bisphenol-free, right? That there may be a substitute chemical in there and that it's a trick of the labeling. And again, don't microwave your plastic, wash your hands,
I'm
keep your
looking
indoor
to see
environment
whether
clean.
she sent us a Zoom invitation.
Okay,
The third category that I want to talk about are PFAS, which stands for, it's another mouthful, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. This is a huge class of chemicals. Thousands of different molecules are in this group. And so they're used in a huge array of consumer products. You typically find them used to make things water resistant, stain resistant, grease proof. You'll sometimes hear people also refer to this class of chemicals as forever chemicals. The reason for that, and it's kind of a wonky, chemistry explanation that I won't get into. I love it. It's one of my favorite topics as a chemist. But their chemical structure is so stable that they are extremely resistant to the typical breakdown reactions, both out in the environment and in the body, that normally would reduce the amount of a chemical over time. So because they last an extremely long time in the environment and in our body, they get the nickname forever chemicals, which is a really unfortunate but more or less true name. This persistence also lets them travel really long distances by air and water as well. And so the environment is essentially universally contaminated with PFAS. And again, because it's such a huge class of chemicals, when one specific chemical gets regulated, as by the Biden administration, we have now some water quality guidelines for 4 specific PFAS. And as Joy mentioned, there is a legal battle over whether or not those standards will continue to exist in their current form. But when one chemical gets regulated or phased out of use, there is a huge stable of other chemicals with similar properties out there as well. And so it is a really difficult category of chemicals to wrangle from a legislative perspective. We encounter these in nonstick cookware. That's one of the places where you need that non-stick kind of grease-proof and waterproof property. A lot of textiles and carpet are treated with PFAS to give them properties like stain resistance, water resistance. If you see things that are like no iron or easy care, sometimes those are kind of code words for has been treated with PFAS. Similarly, clothing and outdoor gear. I love camping. A lot of things are waterproofed. They come to you with PFAS already kind of into the fabric. Joy also mentioned personal care products. That's a great one. Mascara and dental floss, things like that. Those are very common, like waterproof or meant to be slippy, non-stick kind of materials that will have PFAS in them. And then food packaging is another place. This is one that I think is just another regrettable situation. We've moved in a lot of places away from like styrofoam or like big plastic takeout containers, these big durable takeout containers that we know last a long time. They contribute to the plastic pollution crisis. It's great that we have started to move away from those in a lot of takeout settings. What's taken their place? Cardboard, greaseproof paper, things like that, molded fiber foodware, right? Some of those things that look more biodegradable. They are more biodegradable, but they need to have the same resistance to grease, oil, water as the hard, durable containers did from years past. Often they achieve that by treating them with PFAS. There are a number of health concerns with PFAS, and again, this is a big, diverse category of chemicals. So there's a lot here that I'm not going to be able to fit into the time, but they are known to be reproductive toxicants, developmental toxicants. They have neurodevelopmental deficit issues. They can cause immune system suppression. They're known to cause liver damage. Some of them are associated with cancer. So there are a number of reasons to try to cut down on your daily exposure to PFAS. And we can do that just by avoiding products that are advertised with some of those code words for PFAS. So if you're looking for things and you don't absolutely need them to be waterproof or stain-proof or non-stick, that's a great thing to try and avoid. If it contains PTFE or fluoro as a prefix in the ingredients, that's also another sign that there is a PFAS chemical in that product. We can also limit our use of single-use packaging as much as possible. Studies have shown that the more often that we eat takeout and fast food, the higher our body levels of PFAS are. So that's one thing that if we can try to make choices to eat at home more often, then we will potentially, decrease our exposure to PFAS. And definitely when we, takeout is part of life. If you get takeout, take your food out of the container, put it on a plate. Don't prolong the contact with the packaging that is very likely coated with PFAS. And again, don't reheat in that packaging. Whenever possible, look for cookware and bakeware that is not non-stick through the addition of PFAS. So using materials like stainless steel or carbon steel, ceramic, cast iron or enameled cast iron, glass bakeware. These are materials that are going to be safer and more durable in the long run and will not contain PFAS. Bearing in mind that all of these things are choices that we make at the store and they have costs to them. I have one very well-loved nonstick skillet. Everybody has, sources of exposure in their life. We're all doing the best that we can. And again, I want to return at the end of this to the fact that most of what can be done is a collective action. This is just to give you an idea of some places to look where you're less likely to introduce new sources of PFAS into your home if you're shopping for new cookware. Don't go out and throw out all your pans. But, these are some things to bear in mind the next time that you go to the store. Because PFAS are so widely distributed in the environment, looking for drinking water filters that remove PFAS is another really great option for reducing your exposure. The Environmental Working Group has a tap water database where you can plug in your zip code, look at levels of PFAS and other chemicals in your local drinking water. And they also have a great filter guide associated with that resource that will tell you what kinds of filters will remove the chemicals that are found in your drinking water. And again, wash your hands, vacuum with a HEPA filter, dust often, keep your space clean, keep your hands clean to cut down on that hand-to-mouth exposure that we all are just experiencing very frequently. Last but not least, flame retardants. This is a really interesting one. There are a lot of sources of flame retardants that I think are kind of hidden in plain sight. And so this is one that I really wanted to talk about. They've historically been widely used in a lot of consumer products, and their use in certain products has been phased out over time, but they can still be very widespread, and particularly if you're buying a secondhand mattress or a secondhand nursing pillow or things like that. These are places where you might find flame retardants in older products, but less so in newer ones. They're also very persistent in the environment, and they can also bioaccumulate in the body over time. So polyurethane foam products, again, polyurethane foam is a petrochemical. It's essentially just a fossil fuel product, and so it is very flammable. So many polyurethane foam products, especially historically, have been treated with flame retardants. Whether or not the flame retardants actually give you enough time in a fire to escape is something that is a pretty spurious claim by industry. But they are widely used. Another place that you'll see them is children's pajamas. Children's pajamas by law are required to either be flame retardant or to be very snug fitting. You'll see those kinds of two options if you're shopping for pajamas for kids. Electronics are often constructed with flame retardant components, particularly in the plastic, and black plastic products. This is a newer discovery by the scientific community, and so this is something that is still, I think, very much hidden in plain sight for a lot of people. One of the prevailing theories is that recycled e-waste, because a lot of electronics have black plastic components, recycled e-waste might be used in the production of black plastic items. So if there is a flame retardant in the black plastic from an electronic, it can be preserved and then used in, your utensil, your spatula, your sushi tray, all kinds of other black plastic products that you might encounter out in the world. Once again, flame retardants are well-known endocrine disruptors. Many of them have significant effects on the thyroid system. They can be reproductive and developmental toxicants. They can have neurological effects. Some of them are linked to cancer. When you're out purchasing new products, you can look for products with no added flame retardants. If you're looking for a mattress, you can ask the store. They may not know. It may just be a red flag that they don't know, and you can go on and look for another manufacturer that does have more information and more transparency in their products. There are also more options on the market now for wool and cotton and other naturally flame-resistant textiles that are used to make mattresses, to make sofas. So you can kind of expand your horizons there. When you're buying children's pajamas, there's no reason for children's pajamas to have flame retardants in them other than the legal requirement. Get those snug fitting pajamas so that you're not increasing their exposure as well. Again, these things are developmental toxicants. It's not worth the risk. Opt for cooking utensils that are not black plastic. Again, like with the nonstick pans, I don't think you should go out and throw away all your black plastic spoons and spatulas. But as you are phasing them out in the natural use of your products, this is a thing to think about. This is a thing to bear in mind and to look for more durable, non-plastic alternatives. Takeout is a fact of life. When you get takeout, take your food out of especially those black plastic polystyrene trays, right? Those are very likely to be part of the problem here, and don't heat your food up in those trays. And then again, wash your hands. Always, always, always. So those are the hidden toxics that I wanted to talk about. But again, as I mentioned before, as Joy mentioned, I think we're all on the same page here. Ultimately, human and environmental health, these are collective issues, not individual ones. And so the most effective solutions are also going to be large scale. They're going to be collective. At CEH, we are working for a world where you don't have to have specialized knowledge in order to choose safer products or breathe cleaner air or drink cleaner water. I would like for those things to be the norm and be accessible and equitable for everyone. You should not need to be a detective or a chemist to read ingredient labels at the store. You should be able to pick the products that are best for you, knowing that a robust regulatory structure has made sure that they are safe for you before they even get to the store. That is what we're working for. And so there are ways that you can support these kinds of organizations that are using high quality science to fuel that systemic change, to move the market in the direction of safer products. Supporting can look like giving, of course, that's why we're here for Earth Gives. It can also be as simple as signing up to receive email updates to stay informed, following on social media, and this is going to be your most direct way to learn what your organizations are doing, what petitions you can sign, what legislation you might want to pay attention to, and then resources like these or toolkits that you might be able to share with your communities. And of course, we live in a representative democracy. Make sure that your elected representatives know what's important to you. Go to the polls and support those candidates for office at every level on your ballot. Tell your representatives, I almost said tell your toxic representatives, tell your representatives that you support stronger regulations on toxic chemicals. Make sure that they understand that that is part of the priority of their constituency. These are some ways that you can connect with us. We're on every social media platform. Looking forward to seeing you on there if you would like to keep up with our work. And with that, I will pass it back to Rhonda. Thank you so much for listening.
What a great presentation. I am filled with all kinds of wonderful ideas from both of you. So now I want to quickly open, we are kind of like up against some time, but I wanted to open it up to any questions that folks have. Just maybe we can take a couple live and then we can go into breakout rooms. So does anyone, let's see, Abigail? Or she's clapping. I saw that somebody did ask about the top of a plastic container. What are better alternatives? Libby, Joy, either of you?
Better alternatives to plastic containers for food storage
so.
and heating. Yes, I would say that glass containers are typically microwave safe and are going to be much safer in terms of the profile of ingredients.
And I see one on flame retardants. What are alternatives? Just nothing in them?
Alternatives to flame retardants in children's pajamas. So the pajamas will specifically be labeled as snug fit. And if they are not labeled as, and actually either way, I have young kids, and so I'm very much in this ecosystem right now. They will have a tag on them that says this product does not contain flame retardants. It is snug fit. So you're looking for that kind of labeling. In the absence of snug fit language or other labeling that explicitly says there are no flame retardants, I would assume that there are flame retardants.
Joy, what about communicating what we just learned to our friends and family? What's the best way to go about that?
That's a great question. I think the messaging around toxics right now would be really well served by the family values, family support, keeping your loved ones safe argument, because that's something that we all care about, regardless of your background or your affiliation or your age. So I've encouraged folks to talk about protecting your kids, talk about protecting elderly folks and your parents and everyone in this toxics issue.
I noted that somebody said, bring your reusable container to a restaurant. I agree. I do that because it helps. Even if I'm not doing something specifically, I can bring the remainder of the plates home, the food on the plates home to compost, which is a big passion of mine. Well, I wanted to finish up this real quick and then send us into breakout. So we've done the questions. I wanted to make sure that you knew about our next power hour, which is next week on the 30th. It's towards the evening or afternoon, and it's on food waste, soil, eating for kindness to the planet, kindness to ourselves. We hope that you join us again next week. How you can be a part of Earth Gives? Well, not only is Center for Environmental Health and Rachel Carson Council a key place where you can make a donation, but you can also find out all kinds of food recycling and other organizations that you will see there that focus on, like Plastic Free Delaware and Food Cycle LA and other organizations that you can invest in. Earth Gives create this one-stop shop where you can go in and invest and do a green them all at the end. So you share a little bit of funding to all the groups that are participating. Additional way that you can make an impact is sign up your company as a company giver and then adopt nonprofits and invite your employees and your customers in to give through your page with your own messaging. You can do the same as an individual. You just go to a nonprofit that you find on the page, click on the green button under their logo and hit fundraiser. It's free to do it. It takes about 5 minutes to set up. And then you just share that page beyond to your friends and families. You can text it, you can email it, you can use social media, whatever works best. So we hope that you spend up until October 7th participating with us as Earth Givers. And that means where you give your time, your knowledge, your information, and your hard-earned dollars so that more work like what Joy and Libby just shared with us can continue, which benefits us all, whether they're located in our own state. They are having an impact nationwide and globally. So we hope that you invest in them. And then finally, we're going to go into our breakout session. My colleague Luann is going to send us there. Basically, if you end up in a session, we would like you to get to know one another, introduce yourself, share what your takeaway was, and what you're going to commit to do. And if you've got any other ideas and information that you want to share with the group, please do that. Please feel free to share your LinkedIn, but mostly, thank you for being an Earth giver, for celebrating with us today, for learning with us today, and for doing what you can as an individual in the collective to make an impact. Thank you to Libby and Joy so much. We appreciate you. And let's head into the breakout sessions.